Sir, you are live.
Well, good evening, friends. Welcome again to a beautiful webinar's fourth number in the series of the Delhi CSI, the PG track program, Clinical Pearls. So it's been a pleasure since we started this journey almost 3 weeks back, and we have had some wonderful time with you all people joining us, and immense and huge response. And I personally believe that it's not only a learning for you, but for all of us who are there, because the kind of teachers that we are having, somebody has everything, something new every time for all of us. And so learning is an ongoing activity, and I personally believe that the only thing that we require for learning is humility. One who is humble is one who can learn actually. So friends, today in the same series we have the pleasure of having Professor Achyut Sarkar joining us, professor of cardiology from PGIMER in Kolkata. And we have our moderators and panelists in the form of Dr. R.R. Mantri from Sir Gangaram Hospital, Dr. Neeraj Avasthi, who is Principal Consultant Pediatric Cardiology from Max Super Specialty Hospital, and my colleague Dr. Vishal Batra, Associate Professor, and Professor Girish MP from GB Pant Hospital. And I'll be there with you, of course. So now over to Dr. Vishal to introduce our speakers, and then we go on to this beautiful session on cyanotic congenital heart disease, especially focused on Eisenmenger syndrome. How do we approach such case? If you are having any questions, please feel free to type all the questions in the box. And at the end of the session, we will take all the questions from the panelists and the moderators. So over to you, Dr. Vishal and Dr. Neeraj.
Thank you very much, sir. Good evening, everyone. So today our speaker is Dr. Achyut Sarkar. He is my teacher. So good evening, sir. So I welcome you to take class for everyone for a case of cyanotic congenital heart disease. So please listen to the class, and he's a wonderful teacher.
So over to Dr. Sarkar, please. Sir, if you can unmute yourself, thank you.
Sure. I'm audible, no?
Yeah, please go ahead, sir.
Sure. So at the onset, I thank Dr. Gupta and also Dr. Vishal. This is a privilege actually, presenting with or sharing with so many learned teachers and students all over India. So it's really a privilege. Now, what actually I am planning? It's a case of cyanotic heart disease. Focusing on Eisenmenger syndrome. So I have prepared the case on the line of Eisenmenger syndrome. So our discussion will be in orientation of the Eisenmenger syndrome. So this is a boy aged 14 years, presented with exertional breathlessness for 6 years and bluish tinge in the toes and fingers and lips 2 years. You look the order toes, fingernails and lips for 2 years. Now the boy noticed breathlessness or exhaustion 6 years back. It was gradually in onset. Initially had slight limitations of physical activities. He felt unduly breathless and fatigued when playing with his peer mates. As per parents, growth was affected in his first 2 years of life. Subsequently, he continued to grow along own centiles. There is no history of any chest pain. School attendance was around 75% of normal. It has been slowly progressive, and for preceding 6 months, somehow he cannot attempt any sport. He is comfortable at rest, less than ordinary activity like bathing, dressing, cause breathlessness, fatigue, and chest pain. Now he has developed chest pain for 6 months. School attendance reduced to less than 50% of normal. He denied any associations between his breathlessness and any history suggestive of PND, wheeze, cough, or seasonal variations. Breathlessness used to be relieved on rest, but it doesn't get relieved on any specific posture. He noticed bluish discolorations, mostly of toes and lips 2 years back. After running or working, recently he noticed bluish tinges of toes even during rest. Now, somehow, I think he's an intelligent one because he can differentiate these two things. That when he is active, playing or running, he noticed the bluish discolorations, both the toes and the lips and fingers. Now he is noticing only during this. Now issue is if we think something of from these two symptoms only, then what is our impressions? So essentially, probably we are dealing with a congenital cyanotic heart disease, but it is the late onset of cyanosis. Late onset of cyanosis exclude at least a very complex any congenital cyanotic heart diseases. But even the commonest cyanotic heart disease, if we think of say for Fallot's physiology, uh, that is also tenable because there may be a very late onset cyanosis. A pink fellow gradually becomes symptomatic at the age of 6-7 years onwards, simply due to three causes I am discussing. A patient with, say, for a severe pulmonary stenosis presenting with, and gradually he becomes cyanotic because he is suprasetting pressure stretching PFO. But obviously, our focus is on Eisenmenger syndrome. So if we look further, in continuation of this history, parents gave the history of infants and early childhood. Neonatal period and early infancy were very eventful. Baby had significant feeding difficulties and failure to thrive. Each episode of respiratory tract infection was associated with significant distress, suggestive of heart failure. In 2 occasions, baby need hospital admissions. So this is important. This way of elaboration, just not a recurrent respiratory infections. In late infancy, symptoms started abating and around 2 years, he becomes stable. This is a bimodal presentations. After a gap of 5 to 6 years, he started feeling again breathless on exertion. There is important negative points: no history of spell, no history of squatting, one episode of syncope during running 6 months back. So this history, in combination of his presenting complaints, indicates somehow that he has a high flow situations in in neonatal infancy period, faced a high flow situations which gradually abated over first 2 years of life, and then again reappeared at the age of roughly 6 or 7 years. So this bimodal presentations is suggestive of rather Eisenmenger syndrome. Now, when there is a high flow situations in any way, either a clean cut, a large shunts, or a mixing lesions, or any complex cyanotic heart disease with a mixing lesions, why the baby is breathless starting from the infancy, and why he gradually his symptoms started abating. Now, tachypnea, dyspnea, feeding difficulty, there are two explanations. One is pulmonary structural changes, which is more important factor. Pulmonary congestion is rather secondary factor. Large pulmonary flow leads to dilated hypertensive pulmonary arteries, enlarged atrium, and overall dilated heart. These structures compress the bronchi and lung parenchyma. Pulmonary problems caused by this compression are chronic and recurrent atelectasis, pneumonia, bronchiectasis, and infantile lobar emphysema. Left pulmonary artery arches over left main stem bronchus, courses posteriorly around the left upper left bronchus, and descends to the lower lobe. Thus, when dilated, it can compress the left main bronchus and the left upper lobe bronchus. So main compression is from left pulmonary artery. When dilated, right pulmonary artery can compress most commonly the right middle of bronchus. Dilated left atrium lying just below the tracheal bifurcation can cause bronchial compression. Complete obstruction of the bronchus results in atelectasis of pneumonia, whereas partial obstruction results in infantile lobar emphysema. Now, those pulmonary complications due to left to right shunt commonly occur between 2 to 9 months of age. In the first 2 or 3 months, smaller size pulmonary arteries and higher neonatal pulmonary vascular resistance can limit the degree of left to right shunts. But over next few months, PVR comes down, it increases shunts and pulmonary vascular size. Infant becomes progressively symptomatic. Gradually, the aorta become larger in size and cartilaginous over next 9, 10 months or 12 months. They now are stiff enough to prevent the compressive effect of the cardiac structures. This is the most important cause of spontaneous improvement in respiratory symptoms. Decrease in defect size, development of infundibulal obstructions, and pulmonary hypertension may attenuate the symptoms also. Now, one important aspect is that this bimodal presentation is not always in the case of Eisenmenger syndrome, because this is happening when neonatal pulmonary vascular resistance is gradually weaning off over 2 to 3 months. So the effects of shunt becomes obvious. But this may happen in many of the cases of Eisenmenger syndrome, that this neonatal pulmonary vascular resistance doesn't decrease. In that case, this bimodal presentation will be not there. More or less, the child may be asymptomatic from the beginning, because the increased pulmonary vascular resistance will prevent the effects of large shunts, and there will be not at these bimodal presentations. Pulmonary congestion is the another explanations. Left ventricular volume overload is there. Left ventricle gets dilated and hypertrophied, which lead to increased end-diastolic pressure. Eventually, ventricle may fail, which raises the left ventricular end-diastolic pressure further. Pulmonary overcirculation, excessive flow driven by systemic pressure through the pulmonary capillary bed, increases the capillary pressures and alters the pressure relationship with pulmonary interstitial space. These two factors lead to interstitial edema, decreased lung compliance, and tachypnea or dyspnea. Occasionally, there may be frank pulmonary edema. Now, this is the secondary cause, this pulmonary congestion. The structural change is the primary cause. An infant with pre-tricuspid shunt like ASD is less symptomatic. This is because of two factors: increased left atrial pressure as a reflection of increased LV EDP is vented through the septal defects, atrial septal defect. As secondary, left to right shunt here is not driven by systemic pressure. Now with this history, we comes to the general survey. I just focus the salient points. No physical features of any syndrome. Cyanosis in toes around 83% saturations, not obvious in fingers, around 93%. Clubbing grade 2 in the toes and grade 1 in the fingers. JVP normal pressure and normal waves. So this is a differential cyanosis. Now the boy, he gave the history of differential cyanosis, which is very unusual, because unless the difference is 10 to 20%, it is very difficult to appreciate the differential cyanosis. And point to be noted that this is not a very important sign, because not very infrequently upper limb cyanosis and clubbing are also equally present to the lower limbs in case of even PDA Eisenmenger syndrome. But somehow, when it is obvious, then definitely it is a diagnostic points. Now, just a point here, additional point. You know the reverse differential cyanosis, the causes of reverse differential cyanosis. Now, I will enumerate another important cause. It is very uncommon, but still, this is in supracardiac TPVC, can present with reverse differential cyanosis in presence of PDA due to streaming of highly saturated superior venical blood in the right ventricle out into the main pulmonary artery through the PDA and to descending aorta and lower limbs, with streaming of the more desaturated blood from the IVC directed by eustachian valve into the left atrium across the ASD, foramen ovale, left ventricle, ascending aorta in upper limb. So this is very unusual cause. A common cause is, we know, this TGA pulmonary hypertension or TGA coarctation. This TAPVC supracardiac can occasionally cause reverse differential cyanosis. Now, what is JVP in Eisenmengers? Most of the data are from Paul Wood's data. Next means prominent AF may be present in 20 to 25% cases, irrespective of the level of shunt. Large AF is present in ASD around 18% of cases. Otherwise, JVP is insignificant in most of the cases of Eisenmenger syndrome. The pulse was 88 per minute, resting pulse was 88 per minute, regular, no special character, equally palpable in all four limbs. Blood pressure right arm was 94 by 52 millimeter of mercury. Now, is there any special pulse in Eisenmenger syndrome as a whole, in the whole spectrum of Eisenmenger syndrome? Water hammer pulse may be present in 10% cases in PD Eisenmenger syndrome, and in most of the cases of truncus arteriosus Eisenmenger syndrome. Radiofemoral delay, that is coarctation of the aorta may be found in truncus icenomegals and DRV subpulmonary VHT icenomegals. The height was 142 centimeter, weight was 42 kg. So the height was affected a little more than the weight of the boy. Both were affected, but not a grossly affection was there. Now, palpations. Apical impulse was left fifth intercostal space on mid-clavicle line, diffuse continuous with left parasternal impulse. So this is a right ventricular apical impulse. Left parasternal impulse, grade 1 impulse at third and fourth intercostal space. S2 was palpable and pulmonary pulsation was palpable. So what is the hemodynamic impression from this palpatory findings? That means there are features of pulmonary hypertension, but we are getting just a grade 1 parasternal impulse. So the hemodynamic impression is that evidence of significant pH and RV is decompressing. So what is overall left parasternal impulse in Eisenmenger syndrome? In ASD is grade 2/3 in 50 to 60% of cases. In other groups, insignificant at not more than 1/3. P2 is palpable in almost 90% cases in both VHT and PTA and not more than 55% cases in ASD. Pulmonary artery pulsation can be felt in 65% of cases overall, irrespective of Eisenmenger level of shunt. Now, auscultatory findings. That's positive findings I'm telling you. The S1 is normal, S2 physiological splitting, A2 normal, P2 very loud and audible at the apex, no click, no S4, right ventricular S4, no murmur. Now, if we think of the classical auscultatory findings in Eisenmenger syndrome, there should be a pulmonary ejection click in 65% of cases, typical S2, RV S4, S3, mid-systolic pulmonary flow murmur, tear murmur, Gram-Still murmur, and mid-diastolic murmur may be found very rarely. Someone has described it as right-sided Austin-Feld murmur. These are the classical findings described by Paul. You can get in some of your patients, but in our patients, we in S2, let us focus on the second heart sound. There was physiological splitting, A2 normal, PT very loud and audible at the apex. So second heart sound is the most important clinical hallmark in differentiating the shunt at 3 differentiating levels. A loud P12 pulmonary area can obscure the preceding A2 and makes it difficult to appreciate the splitting. Hence, PT is better appreciated at lower space or at the apex. S2 is single in VHT in 55% of cases, around 5% cases only in PDA, and unusual in ASD. Similarly, significant splitting is unusual in VHT, found in 50% of cases of PDA and in 80% case of ASD. So just let us look at second heart on ASD. Splitting S2 remains fixed in ASD irrespective of pH. Intensity, as Satna Lidham described, P2 is almost always heard and recorded in the mitral area in ASD, irrespective of the presence of or absence of pulmonary hypertension, and is probably related to the increased size of the right ventricle, which forms the cardiac apex, and to increase the intensity of P2. So in ASD, pulmonary hypertension, even P2 may be audible without pulmonary hypertension. Now, second heart in VHT Eisenmengers. Splitting, Satnal Lidhams described in ventricular septal defect with hyperkinetic pH. Just point to be noted, hyperkinetic pH, the splitting S2 remains the same as in ventricular septal defect without pulmonary hypertension, except that in expiration, S2 tends to be single, which may be explained by greater overloading of the ventricle and delay of A2 from bigger shunt. In an Eisenmenger's ventricular septal defect, however, the component of S2 becomes both the components of S2 becomes very close and indistinguishable to auscultation and phonocardiography in all phases of respiration, giving rise to the impression of slurring. This is associated with identical systemic pulmonary vascular resistance. So this slurring means we are getting a single second heart sounds. And so Eisenmenger syndrome with a single second heart sounds Diagnosis is obvious, VSD, but we should remember also truncus arteriosus. But if we look at second heart sound in truncus arteriosus with Eisenmenger syndrome, in presence of large left to right shunt, two components around the second heart sound, simulating splitting could be due to single second heart sound followed by opening snap of the relative mitral stenosis, asynchronous closure of the unequal multiple cusps. So this point is important. Asynchronous tensing of the walls of the aorta and pulmonary artery. So occasionally in truncus, we can, second heart sound is always single in truncus arteriosus in even without our Eisenmenger syndrome, but occasionally we can get a sounds around second heart sound. So second heart sound in PDA and Eisenmenger syndrome, to summarize, splitting in hyperconductive PDA, splitting is physiological, may be reversed like PDA without PH. In Eisenmenger's PDA, splitting is physiological. So this is very important point. In Eisenmenger's PDA, splitting is physiological. Intensity of P2 is loud in hyperconductive PH. It is loud and is transmitted to the apex in Eisenmenger's PDA. That is, in hyperconductive PH, we are getting a loud P2, but transmission is more common in when it is a Eisenmenger's PDA. So what may be the estimated PA pressure when we are getting a S2 audible or pulmonary P2 audible at the apex? Now there are many description of this point. Evidence is lacking somehow. Now there is a paper by Lidham and his phonocardiac versus cardiac catheterization study showed that pulmonary systolic artery pressure must be more than 50 millimeter of mercury to get loud P2. Loud means louder than A2. And apical transmission of P2 occurred only when pulmonary artery systolic pressure was in the range of 80 millimeter of mercury. So apical transmission means you are getting a pulmonary systolic pressure in the range of 80 millimeter of mercury. This is a definite evidence by this study. And there is a grading of A2P2 split by Schaefer's. Grade 1 is 30 to 60 milliseconds, 260 to 80. Grade 3, 80 to 110, and grade 4 is 110 more than 110 milliseconds. It doesn't have any clinical implications of this grading. So auscultatory findings were going on, S1, S2. Now there was no click in our index patients. No click was there. Now when a click, significance of click I will describe later. Vascular click Eisenmenger syndrome, click is a little delayed from S1. There is less variable with respirations, and audibility is a wider area. This characteristic of the pulmonary artery vascular click. We do not get any S4 in our patients. Now S4 is found near 40% cases in AST, but less than 3% cases of VSD or PGA, and RVS3 is rare in Eisenmenger syndrome. And actually we do not get any S4 in our patient. And this is the important point. There was no murmur. There was no murmur of shunt either, or no murmur of Graham-Still murmur. Also didn't get any Graham-Still murmur. Now Graham-Still murmur, just a few points on Graham-Still murmur. As the hypertensive pulmonary regurgitation murmur is high pressure, low flow murmur, it is high frequency, soft blowing murmur, based fart in the left second and third intercostal space, but it may be lowered down in left sternal edge and even at aortic area. As soon as pulmonary artery pressure, you know the mechanism, pulmonary artery pressure pulse crosses the right ventricular pressure pulse, that is a diacritic notch. The murmur starts immediately after loud P2. As pulmonary artery to right ventricular diastolic gradient may persist throughout the diastole, so murmur may become pandiastolic sometimes. The murmur of Eisenmenger syndrome is usually pandiastolic, whereas the murmur of postcapillary PH is early diastolic. The murmur may be associated with thrill in 10% of cases. As high frequency and blowing the murmur is often missed. So this is important point. It may be happen that we have missed the murmur in our patient. This was when the hemodynamic auscultation was important. Serotonin selectively increases the pulmonary diastolic pressure and was used in the past to selectively increase the Graham-Still murmur. This has no relevance nowadays, certainly. Now just a question: early diastolic murmur in the left second intercostal space, left second to third intercostal space, aortic regurgitations, pulmonary regurgitations, truncal regurgitations. It may be Dock's murmur, that is a LAD stenosis at the LAD ostium, and chronic renal failure. All leads to a early diastolic murmur on left second or third intercostal space. Now, issue is when we are getting a murmur, diastolic murmur of either could be AR in peer. There is no confusion if we go through all the clinical data of the patients, but somehow the dynamic auscultation simply prompts squatting or transient arterial occlusion, both which will increase the aortic regurgitation murmur, or a simple dynamic auscultation that can differentiate these two murmurs. However, more important is other clinical backgrounds. That is more important to differentiate between aortic regurgitation murmur and pulmonary regurgitation murmur. So far from the clinical history and clinical examinations, if we come to a diagnosis, this is a cyanotic congenital heart disease, or you can describe it as cyanotic congenital heart disease, cyanotic in nature, Eisenmenger syndrome, reversal of shunt at PDA level, cyanotic burden not severe, patient at present not in congestive heart failure, no evidence of infected endocarditis. Now the functional classifications. I will discuss these issues, ACLA or NOIHA or WHO classifications or pediatric functional classifications. So these things I think should be settled by our moderators and panelists. In which way in Eisenmenger syndrome the functional classification should be done, ideally should be done. Now let us see one by one. So the cyanosis are not present when the child was born. So it is congenital cyanotic heart disease or cyanotic congenital heart disease, or better to describe it as cyanotic heart disease, a congenital heart disease, cyanotic nature. That I will ask also moderators, panelists to decide which ideal way they should describe this disease. Now, Eisenmenger syndrome, the triad of congenital systemic to pulmonary communications, pulmonary vascular obstructive disease, and cyanosis. So that is overall our definition of Eisenmenger syndrome. It is evidenced in, or it is common in large defect, shunt at multiple levels, Down syndrome, and born at high altitudes. AST, 2% of patients, post-tricuspid lesions around 50% of patients, complete AVST in 90% of patients, truncus and epiundo nearing 100% of patients. We will get Eisenmenger syndrome. Now, this is a common question that is asked: the age of onset of Eisenmenger syndrome. This is age of onset. So in PDA, 80% in infancy. The process starts very early. So in PDA, infancy, the process starts, as happened in our child also. VSD in 83% cases, ASD just 8% cases. And in adult, in PDA, 15% patient, VSD 2% just, and 92% patient in case of ASD. This is the age of onset of Eisenmenger syndrome. Now, what is the age of presentations? The VSD is first decade, PDA second decade. So roughly our boy presentation is almost nearing second decades, ASD in third or fourth decade. This is age of presentations. Now, as we did there, grade the cyanotic burden. There was no significant cyanotic burden. Roughly, you can do a SpO2 in the examination. Now, if you PCV is available, then you can classify the grading in mild, moderate, severe, extreme, from 80 more than 85%, less than 65%, and PCV 55 to 60%, 20%. Like this, there is a grading of cyanotic burden. Now you are not get, if you don't get the PCVs, depending upon the SpO2, somehow we can grade the cyanotic burden. Usually we do not say mild, moderate, severe cyanosis. Rather, you should describe it a cyanotic burden. That is better to describe cyanosis. So this is very important to clinically decide that there is no features of congestive heart failure. Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir. Please continue. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Sure. So this point is very important, that their patient is having a class 3 symptoms, almost class 3 symptoms, NOIHA class 3 symptoms, but we are not getting any features of congestion or congestive heart failure clinically. Now, this point also should be settled. My learned teachers in the subsequently how they should describe it. This point, no evidence. The next one, no evidence of infected endocarditis, and this is a very important point. So how should we describe the functional class of Eisenmenger syndrome. Now somehow this is a 14 years boy, so we can describe it in NOIHA. Someone suggested for ACLA. Now, when we are assessing Eisenmenger syndrome and advanced pulmonary vasodilator therapy, that therapy, the stage is decided by who functional class, and ACLA is not applicable for this advanced pulmonary vasodilator therapy staging. Now, there is also a suggested staging for pediatric functional classifications. NOIHA functional class somehow sometimes in a child is difficult to apply NIH functional class. So this is to me, this appears to be a little unsettled somehow, in which class we should describe it. Somehow ACLA reference is list actually. You get it in adult Parloff's congenital heart disease cases. I have searched for a long time for a reference for ACLA, but I actually didn't get any strong references to ACLA somehow. Now otherwise we can describe in NOIHA or WHO classifications functional class, but this functional class, this came out in a pulmonary hypertension in children report from PVRI Pediatric Task Force in 2011. It was very important task force. There they describe the children with pulmonary hypertension different age. So this classification is from 6 to 14 years of age, and there was class 1, class 2, class 3A, class 3B, and class 4. These somehow we can think of that expressing the functional class of this grade or this class. Now we come to the investigations. The positive point of investigation: hemoglobin was 17 gram%, PCV 58%, RBC morphology normal. Now issue is in our institution, when we get these findings, we usually do not do the ferritin and transferrin saturation, but somehow ideally even with this hemoglobin, there may be hyperchromic anemia. But if RBC morphology is normal, probably you don't need to do a ferritin or transferrin saturations. That I need the opinion of moderators panelist. His creatinine was 0.8 milligram%, uric acid 3.8, NT-proBNP less than 73 nanogram per ml. So these two are very important for a prognostic angle. This uric acid and NT-proBNP, and those were normal in this child. Relative anemia, there is a rule of this somehow has been 16 gram%, below 16 gram%, but a rule of 15 you can remember is below 15, serum ferritin below 15, transferrin below 15, hyperchromic microcytic. A simple slides will tell you the pattern. So relative anemia, because this is very important, whether in a cyanotic child, the relative anemia is more important than the polycythemic burden. So you should assess the relative anemia very critically actually. So next question is ECG or X-ray, which comes first? For Eisenmengers, we should prefer X-ray because X-ray will give us more information regarding even the level of shunts. We can have informations. So this is one X-ray, this is another X-ray, and this is another X-ray. So if you look at this is, if you cover this part, then you will there is a peripheral pruning you will get. You will have to cover this part, then only you can appreciate a peripheral pruning. The main pulmonary is dilated, right pulmonary is dilated, cardiomegaly is there. Aorta is not that dilated. So this is HD Eisenmengers. Now, if you get an X-ray which doesn't, it looks like sometimes even you can pass out as normal, then that is HD Eisenmengers. And for if you get an X-ray with a dilated aorta, your ascending arch is dilated, arch is descending aorta arch is also dilated, main pulmonary is dilated, and this is likely PD Eisenmengers. Amongst these three, this is PD Eisenmengers. Now this is the X-ray of these index patients. The point to be noted that in this X-ray, still there is a good amount of cardiomegaly. So that is the important point. Though we cannot say this cardiomegaly, whether it is due to RV or LV, we don't have a lateral views, but somehow the cardiomegaly is there. That is the important point. If you compare it, this X-ray, there is no cardiomegaly. This X-ray, its cardiomegaly is still there. And in our index patients, cardiomegaly is still there. Now the radiological changes of pulmonary hypertension, dilatation of the main pulmonary trunks, branch pulmonary arteries, constriction of the peripheral pulmonary arteries, tortuosity of the peripheral arteries, particularly in the lower zones, pulmonary veins show underfilling with overall reduction in caliber, right atrial enlargement and right ventricular enlargement. So you need a lateral X-ray to assess this right ventricular enlargement. Now there is a grading of Simon by Simon. This is called Simon grading. So we grade it at mild, moderate, and severe pulmonary hypertension of this range, mean pressure 20 to 30, 30 to 60, more than 60, depending upon these findings. So pH mild means mild increase in central to peripheral artery ratio. Pulmonary veins and right ventricles are normal in size. Moderate is obvious central artery dilatation and peripheral constriction with transition of point at hilum, and severe means marked dilatation of the central arteries. Peripheral arteries show severe constriction along with tortuosity. There is right ventricular dilatation. So this is roughly a radiological grading, but there is an important sign. It's described by Parloff. Actually, Parloff described this X-ray along with the CT X-ray, CT chest. He compared it of the X-ray. And he described the plexogenic arteriopathy, its reflection in the X-ray chest, 0 being no opacity, 1 mildly pronounced opacity, 2 moderately pronounced opacity, and 3 markedly pronounced opacity. And from this, you somehow can describe that this is a very advanced stage of pulmonary hypertension. These opacities he used to mean it. There, you see this X-ray HD Eisenmengers, the smaller heart size has become smaller, and you can look at these opacities. He meant these opacities, he compared it with CT chest to describe it as a plexogenic arteriopathy. ECG was like this, so there is all features, somehow V3, V4 is not there. There is a gross RVH, and you look at this point, V5, V6. So QFs are still there. This is very important. So left ventricular, in the left ventricular chest leads, the QFs are still preserved in these patients. So X-ray, somehow we get a cardiomegaly is still there, and in ECG we getting that the QFs are preserved in the lateral chest leads. So ecositus solitus, in all somehow I cannot show you all the clippings here, but ideally I should show you all the clippings of this situs solitus, ABBA concordance, non-malleated greater artery. Now, left atrial aortic ratio is 1. So this is somehow the important M-mode findings, or you can measure it from 2D also. So this is 1 in our index patients. So I have just showing you the selective clippings. So ductal view, you can appreciate that this is really a large ductus. And if you look at this, it's mostly right to left shunts, but we can see some flickerings of mosaics. So echocardigraphically, there appears to still left to right components there. Now this is the Doppler findings. This is mostly right to left. Predominantly, I should say right to left. Now, if you look at this, this is somehow bidirectional shunts. You can appreciate it. This is predominantly left to right shunts, but there is also right to left components, and here it is predominantly or almost primarily right to left shunts. So this is a features where we are getting a bidirectional. This is bidirectional, but left to right dominance. This is almost a right to left unidirectional right to left shunts. So in our index patient echocardigraphically, we get in color flow, we get a components definitely of left to right is still there. Now if we look at the cardiac size echocardiographically, then you can appreciate this, that yes, LA is not that dilated. It may be equal to RA, but LV is, you see LV is still not, at least smaller than RV. It appears as slightly maybe larger than RV. I have not giving you the measurements somehow, just at the look of the 2D views. So in the estimated PS systolic pressure was 102 millimeter of mercury, 100 like his systemic pressure. So systemic pressure was 94 or like this systolic pressure, and systemic systolic pressure. TR velocity by VTA RVOT was more than 0.275. So PVR will be naturally come more than 6 Wood units. and TAPSE was around 15 millimeter. Now this TAPSE is a very important prognostic features. If you look at this 13 to 18 years range, then the mean TAPSE is 25.91, and if we take it a Z value, 2 standard deviation is this, 3 standard deviation is this, and if you index the TAPSE, then it's 16.15. So 15 millimeter is just started reducing. Somehow adult, we know that if it is less than 15 millimeter, then that is a prognostic markers. In our indexed boy, the TAPSE was 15, just at borderline. And we did a 6-minute walk test. This is primarily done for follow-up when you are putting it pulmonary vasodilator, but there are few studies that you should look at 6-minute walk test also for prognosis. Now, our boy can walk 200 meters. It was sub-maximal, 80% of the target heart rate. He achieved around 60% of the predicted distance, that is around 200 meters. And on exercise, and this explains why the boy was so much symptomatic just at the age of 14 years. Lower limb saturations as a whole, I should say saturations was fallen. It's not only lower limb. Actually, his saturations overall was fallen by 10% from the resting one. So this is also an important prognostic points from 6-minute walk test. So now the most important issue is his pH is reversible or not. That is actually the most crux of the points. Now overall, the auscultative findings, hardest point of fixed pH is pulmonary vascular peak, that was absent in our boy. Single S2 is it is more relation to VSD, so we get a physiological speed that can be found also in fixed pH. We didn't get any flow murmur and low residual murmur. This is in favor of actually fixed pH, but we do not get any Graham-Steele murmur. Graham-Steele murmur is the hardest point. So vascular clique and Graham-Steele murmur are absent in our patient. So if we look at the points, the boy was significant symptomatic. That is very important. He is having a resting sinuses, desaturation increase on exercise. So this is another point regarding reversibility. Booming and widely distributed P2, absence of murmur. ECG, there is a gross hypertrophy RV, and echo right to left shunt and rest PVR. So these points to some extent pointing towards our irreversibility of the pH, not all the points, but most of the points. But if I look at this, there was no ejection clique, we didn't get any Graham-Steele murmur. ECG, LV forces is still there. X-ray, cardiomegaly is there. Echo, flickering left to right shunts. LA is not that dilated, but LV is still dilated. So these points somehow are featuring that we should look at further. So what next? So we should do definitely cardiac catheterization of this boy. Now, if you look at this, so we are getting a oximetry lift at pulmonary artery from 66 to 80. So certainly there is a component of left to right shunts. And if you look at the saturation ascending out as 94 and in femoral artery 85. So this is the component of the right to left shunts. His mean pulmonary pressure was 75. His mean systemic arterial pressure was 80, 75, 80. And this, according to this data, he is having a bidirectional shunt. PVRI was indexed PVR was 6.9 wood units. Indexed PVR SVR ratio was 0.4. So if we look at these recommendations, so it lies in the gray zone. PVRI between 6 to 8 and PVR by SVR ratio 0.3 to 0.5. So still there is, I shouldn't say hope, but still we should look for acute vasodilator test of this child. So what is ideal vasodilator agents? Ideally, it should be inhaled nitric oxide or aerolized postanoids. Now in our center we don't have this neither nitric oxides or aerolized postanoids. So now if you look at this, if you can do a acute vasodilator challenge, our own issue is only with oxygen. Now, there are several criteria. Now, seat-borne criteria is usually followed. So if you can do a acute vasodilator challenge test with the ideal vasodilator, then a decrease in mean pulmonary pressure by at least 10 millimeter mercury to a value less than 40 millimeter mercury with sustained cardiac output. That is one criteria. Or positive AVT in subject with when the mean pulmonary pressure below less than 40. So this is not applicable for our child. So this is applicable for our child if you can do the ideally the acute vasodilator challenge test. So what can we do actually? You can do a balloon occlusion study. Now, balloon occlusion study, you actually either a balloon or if you can use the device. For PDA, it is ideal. You can use the device for AST also, but balloon occlusion is difficult for VST and for ASTs actually. There is not any consensus. There are several studies. We have our own studies of around 27 patients. Now, there are several criteria followed by in several studies. There is no consensus, obviously. A fall in pulmonary pressure more than 20 millimeter mercury, this is a simple one. Or a post-trial systolic pulmonary artery pressure by systolic pulmonary ratio, that we can also follow. So this is relatively a simple one. They fall in pulmonary pressure more than 20 millimeter mercury without significant fall of systemic artery pressure. So we did a balloon occlusion study of these patients. You know how to do it, balloon occlusion study. You keep a catheter in the pulmonary artery to monitor the pressure. You keep the balloon in the PDA. You keep a pigtail to see that the balloon has occluded the PDA completely, then you look for the fall, any fall of pulmonary pressure and systemic artery pressure. In that way, you do the balloon occlusion studies. So if we combine these things together, and you know this PVRI Task Force Pulmonary Circulation 2001 that I am mentioning about, they have actually described the lesions. So type 1, you have to describe the lesions, and there's a various indices. So for PD it is 1.2, 0.3. So type 1 is PDA. For type 2, you have to mention the dimensions. So it's non-restrictive. They are also mentioned of the sizes, but they mentioned about the size of the ASD and VSD, but they didn't mention the size of the PDA. There we have to mention it non-restrictive. This is a type 3 direction of the shunt. So in our child, this direction was bidirectional. Type 4 associated anomalies, where the child doesn't have any associated anomalies. Type 5 is repair status, that is an unoperated. So this way we can describe in the final diagnosis, this type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4, type 5, and you should describe these things. This is a just universal way of describing PDA, but otherwise we conventionally describe as I mentioned in my diagnosis. So what are the prognostic markers, bad prognostic markers? These resting desaturations. He's having a functional class 3. He's a history of syncope, and 6-minute walk test was significantly compromised. These 4 parameters were bad parameters, but favorable was his age. He's just 14 years. So more the age, more is the age is one of the prognostic marker. So he's just 14 years. Absence of signs of heart failure, that is very important. Normal QRS, we have seen in ECG, he is having a normal QRS duration and QT interval is normal. Uric acid, his uric acid level is normal, and NT-proBNP is normal. So these points are in favor. These points are poor prognostic marker. So roughly how long he will survive. Overall data, 80% survival rate at age 10 years, 75% survival at 15 years, 42% survival rate at rate of 25 years. The mean age at death of patients with Alzheimer's syndrome has been reported with 37 years or less. There are variables in data. Now the old Paul data certainly has changed after the emerging of the pulmonary vasodilator certainly has changed the data. So 1960s data certainly has changed now regarding the survival. Now cause of death, leading cause of death is heart failure, very important. Infection is second most important point. Sudden cardiac death 10%, thromboembolism is 8%, hemorrhage including hemoptysis is 7%, and periprocedural is 7%. This is one of the largest study on Eisenmenger syndrome. That from that I have quoted. This is also variable. Somehow hemoptysis was described by Paulud's very high rate of death hemoptysis. Now this is a changing pattern of cause of deaths. Now we know that prognosis of Eisenmenger versus idiopathic pulmonary hypertension. Prognosis in patients with Eisenmenger syndrome have a better life expectancy than patients with idiopathic pulmonary hypertension who have similar hemodynamics. This was illustrated in several studies are certainly there. Is one of the studies. Now explanation is this difference may be related to part to the preservations of biventricular function in patients with Eisenmenger syndrome with the potential for biventricular sharing of the hemodynamic loading conditions. Now we know that eventually the RV failure is the one of the important leading cause of prognosis. Now in Eisenmenger's right ventricle preserve the fetal pattern with a flat ventricular septum throughout the cardiac cycle and equal thickness of the right and left ventricle free wall. This morphology is same in patients independent of age and defect type. So this fetal type of RV somehow prevents the onslaught of pulmonary hypertension for a longer time. That is the explanation of a relatively better prognosis of idiopathic Eisenmenger's PH over idiopathic PH. Now somehow we know that ASD has a poorer prognosis than VHD and PD once Eisenmenger's develops. Eisenmenger syndrome develops in third to fourth decade in patients with pretricuspid shunt when right ventricle already has lost its fetal pattern. This is the reason why the right ventricle in ASD Eisenmengers cannot tolerate pressure overload and fails easily. This is in turn a worse prognosis in patients with pretricuspid defects after fourth decade of life. So after development of Eisenmengers, the prognosis is poorer with ASD. So I will very quickly go through the management, just very quickly. Volume depletion, Charnas exercise, excessive. You will have to avoid pregnancies, contraindicated. Definitely high altitude should be avoided. Somehow if going by flights is allowed, however. Iron deficiency should be very cautiously looked for. Air embolism, when we are doing any channels, air embolism is a very common thing. So you should avoid all bubbles. And we know that epicardial pacing is preferred than endocardial pacing to avoid thromboembolic events. Phlebotomy, very guarded. We should be very guarded during phlebotomy. Routine oxygen therapy has no role. Somehow nocturnal therapy or nocturnal oxygen therapy somehow gives a symptomatic benefit. Iron supplementation according to hemoglobin, and they should be always given influenza and pneumococcal vaccine. Pulmonary vasodilators, we know this trials. Very importantly was the BREATHE 5 trials. There is a world trials also, obviously BREATHE 5 trials. So ERA favor trials are in favor of ERA, PDA. There are trials, but all these trials except this BREATHE trials are not a very large one. Calcium channel blocker we should avoid. Class 2 or 3 symptoms, combination therapy with endothelin receptor antagonist plus either phosphodiesterase inhibitors or guanylate cycle stimulus or single therapy endothelin receptor antagonist you can use. The available studies suggest improvement in physiological parameters, but improvement in clinical outcome has not been established. And for patients who class 3 symptoms with evidence of right heart dysfunction, progressive or rapidly progressive disease, options to include subcutaneous inhaled treprostinil or inhaled iloprost. Are patients who are who class 4 symptoms, we should use the combination therapy, including the IV prostanoids. So repair after pulmonary vascular therapy, that is also not a settled one. When we are increasing the pulmonary flow, reassessing the patient, somehow in some patients, a few of our patients, particularly with PD and ASD, we have tried it. Interventions after pulmonary vascular therapy, but there is no guideline when we should interfere. At once you are increasing the flow, that increased flow are producing further problem on pulmonary vasculature. So there should be a guideline how you should intervene after pulmonary vascular therapy, after how long a period. That is the important point. And heart lungs transplantation, definitely we should think of. Transplantation should be reserved for severely symptomatic patient who class 4 and 5-year survival less than 50%, and we should think of single lung transplantation is better, and definitely there is a survival benefit when we are thinking of SLT transplant. And I think I should stop it now.
Thank you, Dr. Sarkar. It was an excellent case-based discussion on an approach to a patient with cyanotic heart disease. There are a lot of questions actually, sir. Actually, I'm Dr. Girish from department.
Yeah, Dr. Girish.
Jeevan Hospital, sir. So, if you permit me, I can take some questions from the students who have.
Sure. I think we all can discuss the question. So is now you start discussing the question.
The first one is a patient with PDA, Eisenmenger, 85%. Should we still go? Should the cardiac catheterization be considered as one of the investigation, or it can be done away with? That is question number one. Number two is, can pulse oximeter be used in the examinations, in the exam?
Pulse oximetry. I think we are allowing using pulse oximetry. I don't know what is protocol in your institutions. We are allowing pulse oximetry, and that question is very important. When resting desaturation is there, resting desaturations and desaturation increase on exercise are always a point that the pH is not probably reversible. But somehow in our index patient, there are certain points that LV was still dilated, LV forces was positive in ECG. There was a flickering of left to right shunt in echo, on oximetry, there was a left to right shunt. So, and as PDA, this PDA management, once we decided is easy. So in PDA, probably we can proceed further. That is what is the opinion of my Dr. Gupta?
The question is coming is that, generally the ASD Eisenmenger has a poor prognosis, sir, as you mentioned. The reason for this?
Absolutely. That is another important.
The reason why it is so, sir?
Why? Excuse me?
Why it is so?
Why?
Why ASD Eisenmenger has a poor prognosis as compared to?
Oh, that I explained actually what happening actually. ASD is developing at the age of third or fourth decades. When the fetal heart pattern has changed, there's usually adult RV. So that RV cannot accommodate this high PA pressure. So RV fails. And as RV dysfunction or eventual RV failure is one of the most important cause of prognosis. So that is the reason.
Dr. Neeraj, any other questions from now, sir? Yeah. Dr. Vishal, Dr. Mantri.
Sir, many of the students are asking regarding the full form of UCLA.
Full form of?
UCLA, sir, UCLA. UCLA classification, full form of UCLA.
This is this is a University of.
I think it's the same, sir. University of California, Los Angeles.
Yeah, University of
California.
Same one. Exactly.
Okay, sir.
So when do we generally say that a child is having or the patient is having anemia? So it is very pertinent to mention here that if a person is having a hemoglobin levels of that of a normal individual, then this is anemia for a patient of Eisenmenger.
Absolutely. That is a very simple way of expressing. Very important. Exactly.
And generally it is said that, if we're having a serum ferritin of less than 30 and transferrin between 10 to 20, I think that's a indication of anemia in a patient of Eisenmenger.
Yeah.
I think the panelists can
they can discuss
regarding pertinent.
First question regarding whenever in exam it is asked that the question which has been raised regarding cardiac catheterization. Whenever we are doing catheterization, we are doing for two things. One, to look for operability, and second measurement which is giving is the prognosis. So whenever we are anticipating is catheterization required? Yes, catheterization has to be done prior to initiation of this therapy, because it not only adds to our the diagnosis for operability, it also adds to our prognosis, because it will give us the EDs and response to therapy. Now, regarding operability, in PDA, as sir has clearly said, the occlusion test is very important. The most of the criteria which we are following in operability is ideally we are always doing with nitric oxide. initially we had the Bars criteria, 1986, which came, then came the Rich criteria. Now we are all practically using the Sitbon criteria, which talks of a decrease in mean pulmonary artery pressures of less than 10 millimeters, reaching a mean pulmonary artery pressures of less than 40 millimeters with a unchanged cardiac output. So this statement is very important. When you in exam, the word unchanged cardiac output is very important, because cardiac output should remain the same. For PDA, the absolute Sitbon criteria would not hold, because there is a the shunt which will appear from, it's a bidirectional shunt, so there will be appearance of additional flow into the pulmonary artery. So you need to test occlude the PDA as sir has shown in this case, and then demonstrate a fall to as close as normal. Now this particular thing has been highlighted in the presentation also, that it should be as close to normal, because criteria was initially fall of more than 50%. Now the criteria is that it should be as close to normal, because long-term prognosis is coming up or is not very good. So this was one question which came about the cardiac catheterization. So catheterization is to be done for all.
That's
One
very
more pertinent thing which Dr. Sarkar brought forward for all the panelists is the type of functional class to be used
Absolutely.
in such patients.
That is very important.
very important. Yeah.
So,
So,
in a,
what's
I
your
think,
opinion, Dr.
what is the
Neeraj?
opinion of the panelists?
So when we are talking of different functional class in PH, we are talking of NYHA class. One, what does NYHA class look at? NYHA class looks at the function, what is the physical activity is doing, and what is leading to palpitations, fatigue, and dyspnea. These three parameters. So dyspnea is also a central reflex in many of the Eisenmenger patients. So this thing can become airness. So this was very pertinent question which Dr. Sarkar has raised. Should we be using a NYHA class? So the question came, why not use a WHO class of this? So WHO class, or that is why the Dr. Sheila Heathrow, the study which he has quoted for children, came up with this particular class, which does away with dyspnea as one of the criteria. So personally, I would, and we have been using either WHO or pediatric classification for functional class for all our PH patients, because NYHA class can be used, but it has got palpitations and dyspnea. There are two components which may go in with many of the Eisenmenger's patients, so it does not fit into it. So WHO.
So what is the practice at your center, Dr. Sarkar? Which classification?
Classification, somehow we still we are following this NYHA.
NYHA.
Now I have another question for that is, I am not, it is not settled to me also. Now I also put the issue in the diagnosis, when say for a patient is having a class 3 symptoms. Now how will you put it that patient in regarding the heart failure, whether we are using the term patient not at present not in congestive heart failure, or we should say patient in heart failure when patient is symptomatic, but we are not getting any clinical signs of heart failure. So that is something students always ask me in the exam. They are also confused. What is your protocol? How this should be expressed in the exam, actually, in relation to these points? No heart failure, no congestive heart failure, like this in any patient, not only for this patient, in other way.
I think by going the Framingham classification, I think class 3 dyspnea would fit in. But again, as highlighted by Dr. Neeraj, since most of these patients would be having neurally mediated dyspnea, whether to actually, would that be a sign or symptom of heart failure is debatable.
Absolutely.
It is debatable.
I also agree.
So rather than classes, I would say that heart failure means during clinical examination, it means tachycardia, tachypnea, cardiomegaly, and blood pressure changes. So these are clinically which will point towards a heart failure when you are presenting an exam. So if you have any of these features, tachycardia, which is out of proportion,
you won't obviously get a cardiomegaly in probably in Eisenmenger, or for that matter, any cyanotic heart disease. So would you take a positive hepatojugular reflex as a part and parcel of
it's a very important. We have to take the whole scenario. What say we are taking this particular case. This particular case is not in CHF. What will be the features in this particular case that patient is going into CHF? One, normally a PDA second heart sound is not appreciable. what happens if you look at Perloff, it clearly shows no second heart sound in his slides, no, initially. Then there will be appearance of a second heart sounds, which is very well audible. A well audible heart sound. Then comes the disappearance of the diastolic component, and then comes the appearance of systolic component. And then this is how the pH progresses in this. So we know I'm talking in terms of exam.
Yeah.
So in exam, if I'm able to hear my second component, which is loud, very well, which is also heard equally at the apex, if my suppose heart failure sets into, what is the change? Heart failure tends to degrade the pulmonary component. So there will be a splitting which is going to appear, which is as the pH increases, normally the splitting, it is going to be single. But as the heart failure sets in, my splitting is going to appear. Number one. Secondly, my RV size is going to go up. So my RV is going to, my cardiomegaly will begin. Normally, Eisenmenger should not have a cardiomegaly. My RV size will begin to appear. In JVP, normally only idiopathic pH should have a prominent A wave. Eisenmengerizations, Perloff clearly says no, there is no A wave is naturally not present unless you will have prominent V wave if TR sets in. Otherwise, if the failure sets in, you will start to becoming a prominent V wave. The appearance of back pressure changes, the appearance of V waves, which are better, or as Dr. Girish is saying, appearance of hepatomegaly and the hepatojugular reflex sets in. So these pointers tell to me that this patient is going into a failure. S3 is not a feature of Eisenmenger. Appearance of S3. So if I have to summarize, tachycardia on examination out of proportion, JVP showing a prominent V wave, prominent neck veins, which is never seen in Eisenmenger. They are a feature of prominent A waves are only a feature of idiopathic pH. Otherwise, JVP is not raised in Eisenmengers. Third, a cardiomegaly. Fourth, the appearance of hepatojugular reflex or hepatomegaly would point to me a clinical evidence the patient is going into failure.
So, Dr. Sarkar, there is another question, Dr. Neil, also, that why there is a radiofemoral delay which is observed generally in a truncus and DORV with Eisenmenger.
Neeraj, you just Dr. Neeraj.
Yeah. So what we mean by radiofemoral delay, there is a significant proximal obstruction. What sir wanted to talk, if you clearly see, he's talking of DORV. DORV is not a disease, it is a spectrum. So he's talking of a DORV subpulmonary VSD, that means a Taussig Being-like anomaly, which go earliest into Eisenmengerization. And these are invariably associated with arch obstructions. So radiofemoral delay, when I want to say, I am predominantly looking at something which is proximally obstructive. So these are seen in a Taussig Being variety of tetralogies, also a truncus where the interruptions are common. I can have these kind of, otherwise radiofemoral delay basically point to obstruction. So we cannot say DORV by, if you have a case presentation and you are saying a DORV going into Eisenmenger means nothing. DORV pH will go into Eisenmenger, DORV Taussig Being will go into Eisenmenger, but DORV VSD PS will not go into Eisenmenger. So DORV means nothing in exam. You have to look at the physiological spectrum which you are dealing with.
Absolutely.
Oh, another person who has said is that, what are the poor prognostic markers? Sir has very nicely said, but what are the poor echocardiographic parameters for prognosis of Eisenmenger, predictory prognosis of Eisenmenger? So just to summarize that, there are three parameters as has been rightly highlighted: lower TAPSE, larger RA diastolic area, and the RA to LA ratio. These are the three markers that are prognosticating the patient of Eisenmenger. When should a phlebotomy be done in a patient of Eisenmenger?
Dr. Neeraj?
Yeah. So what is the indication of doing a phlebotomy? Normally we do a phlebotomy whenever the patient is having polycythemia, is symptomatic. That means hyperviscosity features are coming up. Otherwise, it is not a preferable modality to go.
Yeah,
there is a risk involved. No, there is a right to left shunt which is happening, and if you introduce IAR, it is going to be a paradoxical. So phlebotomy is not a preferred modality. If the patient is symptomatic, or the hematocrit count, absolute hematocrit count is more than uh, 65 or 65, 60 more than 65 symptomatic or more than 70 asymptomatic, that is very high. That means in Eisenmenger, then you only go for a phlebotomy. Otherwise, phlebotomy is not a treatment of choice for any of the Eisenmenger. It is not something routine which should be doing.
Absolutely.
Should NOACs be used in cases of Eisenmenger? NOACs or oral anticoagulants, any role? A couple of residents are asking.
So, what is the? Sorry, I am anybody.
Yeah.
Probably we are.
Yeah.
So at present, there are no guidelines for using of oral anticoagulants and NOACs in Eisenmenger as of now. So currently, so I'm not actually aware if anybody.
No, oral anticoagulants are not to be used.
Not
You
to
must
be used.
remember that Eisenmenger is a state where there is coagulation abnormalities which are associated. So it is very clear that risk of bleeding outweighs the risk of using anticoagulation. So it is you have evidence of DVT or you have evidence of pulmonary thromboembolism which is there. Otherwise, and oral anticoagulants should not be used in case of Eisenmenger.
What about 6 minutes walk test? Should the student be doing it in exam or no?
In exam, I think
6 minutes.
it is difficult to do it. It's not probably they should not do it 6 minutes.
Not needed actually.
6
So
minute
basically
walk test is
Exam.
a prognostic feature.
Prognostic.
Absolute value has no value.
Exactly.
But the change in 6 minute walk test is very important. So whosoever is following up in the OPD, it's must to have a 6 minute walk test. But for exam, it's a diagnostic thing. So it should be definitely the question will come in discussion, but I don't think you are expected to do a 6 minute walk and it will add to your diagnostic. It means nothing. If your 6 minute walk test is 150 meters in one sitting means nothing. But what is the change over the next? What is your change with response to therapy is more important. So isolate. I don't think if we should be promoting a 6 minute walk, and we expect a 6 minute walk test in the exam.
Yeah, I also think so.
So, if there are no more questions, anything else, Dr. Vishal, Dr. Krish, Dr. Mantri, or any
Yeah,
other-
there is a. I thought
Yeah,
this question
please.
will come because very commonly exam question, as sir is saying, they talk of repeated chest infections. So we are ask repeatedly, what is repeated chest infection?
Exactly.
So this question is also commonly asked. Nowadays we don't ask it, but yes, classically there is a definition of repeated rhinitis, which is more than 5 per year. Repeated otitis media, which was more than 3 in 6 months or more than 4 per 12 months. These were the two definitions. If somebody really asks you, then you can say the definition of LRTI is not clear. But Gruffo et al. का जो criteria जो अभी तक follow हो रहा है, which is 1988 वाला criteria, that more than 6 or more episodes per year or more than 3 episodes in any 6 months of lower respiratory tract infection. One, and second criteria which was defined by Dr. Lodha from which was essentially for their chest infection protocols. That means recurrent advice. They used to take more than 2 infections in 1 year. That came in Indian pediatrics in 2000. So most of the time it is not defined, but these two criteria are commonly used because our
what is
patient
the
had
reference?
repeated
What is the
infection.
reference for the first one? If you can repeat.
Gruffo et al. In 1988 they published it, and everywhere you find this bed infection, they will find this reference. But they clearly mention that repeated chest infection is not well defined. ENT में defined है, otitis media or rhinitis.
And this is a frequently asked question in the exam also. We also used to ask this question.
Yeah, no more.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a elaborate and exciting presentation. It was really a pleasure to hear, as always. And thank you, Dr. Mantri, Dr. Neeraj, Dr. Girish, Dr. Vishalan. More than 650, 700 people are today here with us on this journey. And I personally believe it has been a great learning. And if you have any other questions, my dear friends, any other queries, any particular session that you want, please feel free to write to us on our same email address. And next week, we are going to come to you with acute rheumatic fever, whatever you need to know from your exam purpose, what are the questions, queries, what are the current guidelines, everything. So we will be coming up with the presentation of acute rheumatic fever. So sir, thank you so much for joining us and taking out time for this beautiful presentation. Thank you, Dr. Neeraj, for being a great input. Thank you, Dr. Mantri. Thank you, Dr. Vishal, Dr. Girish. And thank you, Indas, for giving us a great academic support. Thank you again. and see you soon next week. Till then,
Stay
goodbye.
safe, sir.
Thank you.
Stay-
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.